So the SIG P320, year ago, when in fact I started making the online general defensive handgun class, we talked about gun designs that we like, don't like, etc. And I included the SIG in it. If for whatever reason you don't want to get a Glock, we have the SIGs. SIG's a great brand. It's been on the market for enough years that we have a great idea of what its track record is. This is the SIG 320 and is basically the same size as the Glock 19. And at the time, there were numerous reports about problems. I, at that time, still thought they were probably combinations of operator error, bad holsters, etc. Okay. Mostly because I've seen the SIG shot in our classes, and I know very experienced shooters, Grandmaster USPSA shooters, who are also police officers, who have been using the gun since it came out, since that model came onto the market. And I've heard of no problems, okay? Now, all these problems kept surfacing in videos. Now, most of these videos were very grainy, but they still existed. And it became clear in enough of those videos that people were not touching the guns. Okay, so even then, I thought, well, maybe it's something to do with the holsters. Holsters for flashlight-mounted guns do have more potential for error. Because of the size of the flashlight sitting in front of the trigger guard, the area of the holster where you put the gun in, where the trigger guard goes, where the trigger is much larger than normal. On a normal holster, for a gun that does not have a flashlight, the trigger guard of the holster is going to be molded fairly tightly around the trigger guard. Now, if something like a piece of brass or gear or something got into your holster, into the trigger guard area, most likely it's going to stay in front of the trigger guard, and the gun just isn't going to holster all the way. The problem we have with flashlight guns is that that area is so big that there's the potential for things to be in there and the gun to go in the holster, the front of the trigger guard to pass whatever that object is and then get in the trigger guard. So I'm looking at these videos a year ago and I'm thinking to myself, probably still operator error. There's a lot of people that are still dangerous with guns and still press the trigger even when they say they're not. There's problems with these holsters, etc. But then the evidence just kept piling up.
Investigates tonight is examining safety concerns with a popular handgun that's used by police that allegedly fires on its own without the trigger being pulled.
And I started looking at more and more and more videos. I spent a couple hours just looking at all the videos I could find, and there was enough video evidence. It became obvious something was going on.
My gun just went off. Okay. It's in the holster.
Now, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew something is going on. And the other thing we have is we have this statistical anomaly. If we have a gun that has less than 10% of market share of striker-fired guns, yet 90 to 100% of all the videos of guns going off in holsters or possibly in holsters or being touched a little bit while on the holster or not being touched at all in the holster. Like we have all these different videos. And once again, nobody was sitting there with a high-performance camera watching this when it happened. This is CCTV. This is, body cams, etc. So none of it's super high quality, but there is enough of it that you keep seeing it happen. Why is it happening at over a 90% rate with a gun that has less than 10% of the market share? Where are all the videos of the other striker-fired guns that have been out there for a long time? Police departments started adopting the Glock very, very early, right? It's been heavily adopted by police departments for 35 years. Where are all these videos? All right. And we can look at the safety things. Yes, when the Glock first hit the market, people weren't that safe with their trigger fingers, right? They were used to double action autos, they were used to revolvers, and there was an evolution to get safe. But that evolution has taken place now. And now we have people that are much safer with their trigger fingers. So most of these people with these SIGs probably had another striker-fired gun prior to the SIG. Yet, this is the problem. So what's going on? I don't know. I didn't know, I should say. And now we have what looks like some better evidence. Now, what we had was anecdotal evidence, which, though a low form of evidence, is still evidence and should not be ignored. And then we end up having basically a case study or case series once we get these happening all over the country. And now we have the FBI lab report that says that it looks like the gun will release the striker from torsion between the slide and the frame, like those that could be experienced in the holster. Okay. So what does that mean? It means that the play between the frame and the slide is enough that when various things happen, there's a chance that the striker gets released. And the FBI made this happen multiple times. Now, that's one report. And it's a redacted report, somewhat redacted, but, we can get the gist of the information. You can look it up online, see the link to it. And what's going on? Well, if you think about it, one of the ways where this is being held, right, where the striker's being held is way at the rear, okay, way at the rear of the gun. And it would make sense, especially when someone touches the gun in the holster, that they could put, if they're grabbing the grip, they could put this kind of pressure, like the slide could be holding, right? The slide could be being held by the holster sufficiently well that the pressures of putting your hand on the gun to either put the gun in the holster or take the gun out of the holster could be enough to cause that torquing. Plus, we have videos that are obviously just guys in motion, right? Guys, men and women. And it's just the motion. Okay. So what does this mean to you if you're a SIG owner? I don't know. You're an adult. You have to make your own choices. I have not gone to the point to say that someone can't have one in class, though I'm kind of leaning that direction until we really sort this out, because this is not an issue with any other gun, right? Like, why should we be making an exception for one gun and letting this pass, like having this risk? So what does it mean to you? I don't know. Make your own choices. At a minimum, right, if I owned one of these guns, I would test it rigorously. And I'm not talking about this test. You've seen this internet thing where guys are like pulling the trigger a little to the rear and pinning it and showing that stuff can happen, or people are hitting it. Okay. Those are very rare situations. Now we're getting into like, how often is your gun going to get struck or dropped on concrete at exactly the right angle, all that kind of stuff. But the gun just going off in the holster from just the torsion of you moving about, or you gripping the gun and taking it out of the holster, that is a much, much bigger deal. So you could take prime cases. For now, you could buy yourself 50 prime cases. I'm sure that would cost barely anything. You probably have to buy at least 50. Or if you reload, of course, you can just make some. And I would test this. I would test the living heck out of my gun. So it's not happening with every gun, right? There's been some other stuff on the internet that has showed some what were purported to be low quality, right, parts coming from third world nations that were being put in the guns, and not aftermarket parts. We're talking factory parts. I can either confirm or deny this, right? I don't have any direct evidence of this, but it looks like there could be a QC problem. There could be some tolerance stacking issues. I don't know. If I owned the gun, I would test it. Or, of course, you can shoot a Glock. So once again, grip, clear, lock, ready, sight. Gun didn't fire for some reason. Tap, rack, bang. It still didn't fire. Lock, rip, work, tap, rack, bang. We're going to have a system of being aware, and it's going to start with condition white. It's going to go white, yellow, orange, red, and black. We're using an extended system. That is the justification for use of deadly force, is the conservation of innocent life. You have to be able to look at this situation and not only think to yourself ability, opportunity, jeopardy, preclusion. You have to ask yourself why you're doing this from a moral standpoint. You're going to come back, you're going to come down, you're going to grab that concealment with your middle finger lifted out of the way and holster the gun.
Like always, when you holster your gun, gently holster your gun to ensure that nothing is in the holster, in the trigger guard, etc. You don't need to shove the gun in the holster. Place it gently in the holster. Come back to the ready position, and now 2-on-1 exercise.